Hello, everyone. Today we're going to build a practical, research-informed understanding of motivation at work, what it is, why it changes, and how leaders can influence it without falling into the common traps of just pay more or just inspire people. Motivation is best understood as a process that determines three things: how intensely someone works, the direction their effort takes, and how long they persist when obstacles arise. Intensity is about energy. Direction is about whether that energy is aimed at the right goal. Persistence is about staying power. If you've ever seen a team that works extremely hard but seems busy rather than effective, that's often a direction problem, not an intensity problem. And if you've seen a capable employee start strong and then fade over weeks or months, that's often a persistence problem, not a capability problem. A helpful starting point is to recognize that motivation varies both between people and within the same person over time. Someone can be highly motivated in one role and unmotivated in another, or motivated in the morning and depleted by late afternoon. That's not just personality. It's the interaction between the person and the situation. So as advanced OB students, the question becomes, what are the major families of explanations for motivation, and what do they each contribute? One useful way to organize the landscape is to separate theories into three groups. First, content approaches, which focus on what people fundamentally want or value. Second, context approaches, which focus on how consequences and environments shape behavior. Third, process approaches, which focus on how people choose goals and decide whether effort is worth it. Each group explains something important, and the real skill is knowing which lens to use for a given motivational problem. Let's begin with a few classic ideas, not because they are perfect, but because they still influence managerial thinking. Many leaders intuitively operate as if motivation is mainly about needs. For example, they assume people are motivated by security, belonging, recognition, and growth, and they try to satisfy those needs through pay, stability, culture, and development. You've probably seen versions of this logic in organizations. We need to build belonging, or people want recognition, or they're looking for growth. The risk with older need approaches is that they can oversimplify and imply a universal sequence, as if everyone climbs the same ladder in the same order. But the value in these approaches is that they remind us that money is not the only driver and that dissatisfaction and motivation are not the same thing. For instance, improving working conditions may reduce complaints without producing real engagement. Removing pain does not automatically create drive. Now let's move into contemporary content-based approaches that are extremely useful in modern organizations. A central one is self-determination theory. The practical message is this: people are more motivated when they experience their behavior as autonomously chosen rather than controlled. When work feels like a freely chosen action connected to personal values, motivation is typically more sustainable. When work feels like compliance under pressure, motivation often becomes brittle. Here's the key nuance. External rewards and pressure are not always bad, but they can crowd out intrinsic motivation if they make a previously meaningful task feel like an obligation performed only for reward. That's why incentives sometimes increase the quantity of work while reducing its quality or creativity. In real terms, if you pay people only for speed, you may get speed and lose care. If you pay people only for short-term metrics, you may get short-term wins and lose long-term thinking. A related idea is self-concordance. People persist more when their goals align with their identity, interests, and values. If the why behind a goal feels authentic, persistence is easier. If the why feels forced, people can still perform, but strain increases and burnout becomes more likely. Self-determination theory also highlights basic psychological needs that repeatedly surface in workplace motivation: autonomy, competence, and a sense of connection. Autonomy is the experience of having meaningful choice and discretion. Competence is the experience of being capable and improving. Connection is the experience of belonging and being respected. When these needs are supported, motivation tends to rise. When they are blocked, motivation tends to become fragile or defensive. This gives leaders a very practical diagnostic tool. If motivation is low, ask whether people feel overly controlled, ineffective, unsupported, socially excluded, or disrespected. You'll often find that what looked like a motivation problem is actually an autonomy, competence, or connection problem in disguise. A second content-based lens is regulatory focus theory, which is about how people pursue goals. Some people, or sometimes the same person in different situations, are more promotion-focused. They're motivated by growth, gains, advancement, innovation, and possibilities. Others are more prevention-focused. They're motivated by duties, responsibilities, safety, reliability, and avoiding losses. Neither orientation is better. What matters is fit with the task and the context. Creative work and exploration often benefit from a promotion focus. High reliability work, such as compliance, safety, and risk management, often benefits from a prevention focus. Leaders can make a major motivational difference by framing goals to match the team's focus or the demands of the moment. If you tell a prevention-focused team, "Let's take big risks and disrupt everything," you may trigger anxiety and resistance. If you tell a promotion-focused team, "Just follow the rules and don't make mistakes," you may trigger boredom and disengagement. You can also create motivational synergy when a leader's framing aligns with an employee's focus because people feel more understood, more aligned, and often more willing to go above and beyond. A third content-based construct you'll hear a lot about in organizations is engagement. Engagement is often described as the investment of physical, cognitive, and emotional energy into work performance. You can think of it as energy in action. It's related to job attitudes, but it's not identical. Engagement includes vigor and absorption, being mentally present and invested. Engagement is valuable because it connects motivation to the lived experience of work. But we should be careful with the use of engagement as a buzzword. If leaders treat engagement as a vague morale concept, they can miss the real levers. Engagement rises when work is meaningful, when people have resources and clarity, when they feel progress, when they are treated fairly, and when leadership signals that effort will be valued rather than exploited. Now let's switch to context-based approaches because sometimes motivation is less about inner needs and more about consequences and learning. Reinforcement theory takes a behaviorist stance. Behavior is shaped by its consequences. If a behavior is followed by a desirable consequence, it becomes more likely to repeat. If it is followed by an undesirable consequence, it becomes less likely. In organizations, this happens constantly, often unintentionally. A manager who praises someone for staying late may be reinforcing overwork. A system that promotes employees who look busy may be reinforcing performative busyness rather than real impact. A culture that punishes mistakes harshly may reinforce risk avoidance and silence. The key insight is that organizations always reinforce something. The question is whether they are reinforcing what they actually want. A crucial extension is social learning theory. People don't learn only from what happens to them. They also learn by observing what happens to others. This is one reason leadership behavior is so motivationally powerful. If employees see that someone who speaks up is punished or ignored, they learn quickly that voice is unsafe. If they see that someone who collaborates is rewarded, they learn that helping is valued. Role modeling can motivate or demotivate without a single formal incentive being changed. This is also why values posters often fail. Employees watch behavior and consequences, not slogans. If leaders say, "We value work-life balance," but praise only those who are always available, people learn the real rule. Now let's move into the process-based theories, because these are often the most directly actionable when diagnosing why effort is not happening. Expectancy theory is one of the most practical models you can use as a leader or consultant. It says motivation depends on three linked beliefs. First, expectancy. Do I believe my effort will actually lead to good performance? Second, instrumentality. Do I believe good performance will lead to outcomes or rewards? Third, balance. Do I actually value those outcomes? When any of these links is broken, motivation drops. This is incredibly useful because it tells you exactly where to intervene. Imagine an employee who says, "Why bother? It doesn't matter." That could mean expectancy is low. Maybe they lack training, tools, or clarity, so effort doesn't reliably translate into performance. Or it could mean instrumentality is low. Maybe performance is not recognized, promotions feel political, or rewards seem arbitrary. Or it could mean valence is low. Maybe the reward isn't meaningful to them, or the goals don't align with their values. The leadership mistake is to treat all "why bother" statements as laziness. Expectancy theory treats it as a diagnostic puzzle. Which belief is failing? And what structural change would repair it? Goal-setting theory adds another powerful set of insights. Goals direct attention, mobilize effort, increase persistence, and encourage strategy development. But this only works when goals have certain qualities and when the surrounding conditions support them. Goals tend to be most motivating when they are specific rather than vague, difficult but accepted, and paired with feedback. A vague goal like "do your best" doesn't tell the brain where to aim. A specific goal like "reduce customer response time from 48 hours to 24 hours by the end of the month" creates focus and a clear standard. Difficulty matters because challenging goals can be energizing, but only if people believe the goal is achievable and legitimate. If goals feel impossible or unfair, they can produce anxiety, disengagement, or even unethical behavior. This brings us to a major advanced point. Goals can backfire. When goals are tied to money, status, or fear, and when the system emphasizes attainment at all costs, people may narrow their attention so much that they ignore ethics, quality, or long-term outcomes. Time pressure near a goal can tempt people to cut corners. People may also adopt avoidance strategies to protect their image, such as hiding mistakes or withholding information. The practical takeaway is that goal systems require ethical safeguards. Leaders need to be explicit that how the goal is achieved matters, not only whether it is achieved. Goal setting also works differently depending on task characteristics. For simple or well-learned tasks, individual goals can be highly effective. For complex, novel, or highly interdependent tasks, individual goals can become dysfunctional, encouraging silo behavior and reducing information sharing. In interdependent teams, shared goals and strong coordination norms often matter more than individual performance targets. This is where master's-level thinking becomes important. You're not just choosing a goal, you're designing a motivational system that either supports collaboration or undermines it. Self-efficacy theory is another cornerstone, the belief that you can perform the task. When self-efficacy is high, people are more likely to take on challenges, persist through obstacles, and recover after setbacks. But self-efficacy is not just a trait, it can be shaped. One way is mastery experiences, successfully completing tasks, especially progressively harder ones. Another is vicarious modeling, seeing someone similar to you succeed, which signals, "This is possible for me too." Another is verbal persuasion, credible encouragement and coaching. And another is managing arousal, helping people interpret stress as manageable rather than overwhelming. You can see immediately how leaders influence self-efficacy through coaching, onboarding, feedback, and team climate. You can also see how organizations destroy self-efficacy by throwing people into complex tasks with no training and punishing early mistakes. A related phenomenon is the Pygmalion effect, a self-fulfilling prophecy in which higher expectations can lead to better performance because leaders behave differently, more support, more opportunities, more patience when they believe someone can succeed. The implication is not that leaders should inflate expectations unrealistically. The implication is that expectations shape leader behavior, and leader behavior in turn shapes employee outcomes. So leaders should be mindful of how quickly they label someone as high potential or not strong, because that label can become a mechanism that creates the result. At this point, we've covered motives, contexts, and processes. Now we need to discuss fairness, because perceived justice is one of the strongest predictors of motivation, commitment, and counterproductive behavior. People are not only motivated by what they receive, they are motivated by whether they believe the system is fair. Organizational justice includes multiple dimensions. Distributive justice is fairness of outcomes, pay, promotions, recognition, workload. Procedural justice is fairness of the process, whether decisions are consistent, unbiased, based on accurate information, and allow voice and appeal. Informational justice concerns explanations, whether leaders communicate honestly and transparently about decisions. Interpersonal justice concerns dignity and respect, whether people are treated as valued human beings in everyday interactions. The reason this is so powerful is that fairness shapes motivation, even when outcomes are imperfect. If employees believe the process is fair and leaders communicate respectfully, they are often more willing to accept unfavorable outcomes. If employees believe the process is unfair or leaders are disrespectful, motivation can collapse even when outcomes are decent. This is why organizations can lose trust during change initiatives, not only because people dislike change, but also because they experience it as procedurally unfair, poorly explained, or disrespectfully implemented. Fairness also has behavioral consequences. When people perceive unfairness, they may reduce inputs, disengage emotionally, complain, withdraw citizenship behaviors, or even leave. In some contexts, they may engage in counterproductive behaviors. The fairness lens is especially important because managers often unintentionally create injustice through small daily choices, giving one person better information, granting exceptions quietly, failing to explain decisions, or speaking to people dismissively under stress. Many motivation problems that appear to be low work ethic are actually reactions to perceived injustice. Now, as a final step, let's integrate these theories into a single coherent way of thinking. A modern integrative view often relies on expectancy logic as its backbone. People invest effort when they believe effort can produce performance, when they believe performance will be recognized and rewarded, and when the reward is meaningful. But that backbone is shaped by content factors like autonomy and regulatory focus, by context factors like reinforcement and role modeling, and by justice perceptions that determine whether the system is trusted. Here's what that means in practice. If you're trying to motivate a team, you should avoid one-size-fits-all interventions. Instead, diagnose which mechanism is weak. If people don't try, ask whether they feel competent and supported, whether they understand the goal, and whether they believe effort matters. If people try but focus on the wrong things, ask whether the goals are clear and whether the incentives reward the right behaviors. If people start but don't persist, ask whether goals are too overwhelming, whether progress feedback is missing, whether autonomy is being crushed by micromanagement, or whether the environment is draining energy through unnecessary friction. If people perform but disengage emotionally, ask whether justice and respect are missing, whether values are misaligned, or whether the organization has created a system of controlled motivation that produces compliance but not commitment. One more crucial applied topic is the folly of rewarding A while hoping for B. Organizations often design reward systems with good intentions, only to accidentally motivate the wrong behavior. If you reward perfect attendance, people may show up sick and spread illness. If you reward call center speed, people may rush customers off the phone. If you reward individual sales numbers, people may undermine colleagues or oversell. If you reward short-term results, people may take long-term risks. This is where reinforcement theory becomes essential. The system will shape behavior. Leaders must continually audit what is actually being reinforced and whether it matches the real goals. Now let's end with a clean set of leadership principles that follow from everything we've covered, stated in a way you can apply. First, treat motivation problems as diagnostic problems, not moral problems. Second, design work to support autonomy and competence, because controlled motivation is fragile and expensive. Third, use goals carefully. Make them specific, challenging but legitimate, and pair them with feedback and ethical safeguards. Fourth, build self-efficacy through training, coaching, modeling, and smart task design, because confidence and capability drive persistence. Fifth, remember that people learn by watching what happens to others, so leadership behavior and consequences must align with stated values. Sixth, protect fairness. If you want sustained motivation, you cannot treat justice as a soft issue. Fair processes, transparent explanations, and respectful treatment are core drivers of effort and citizenship behavior. If you integrate these principles, you'll see motivation differently. You'll stop asking, "How do I get people to work harder?" and start asking, "How do I design a system where effort is meaningful, success is possible, fairness is credible, and the right behaviors are reinforced?" That shift is what separates superficial motivation tactics from real organizational capability. Thank you for joining me.